motherfucking G.
Welcome to the T-Force LCS Rundown. This is Mott Ganorum, and I am joined this week by a great group of guys. I tried to do it like Adam this week. Give the old-fashioned Adam introduction.
There's your first problem.
Adam Ponophobia Cogswell.
Didn't swear or drink enough.
With a great group of guys. I'm joined this week by Optimus Tom.
I'm assuming we're a group of guys because we're each one of Zach's blobs after his passive. That's what I'm rolling with.
You stole my bad joke.
Dan C. Fedrakos.
Yeah, you're supposed to give me last so I could make another bad joke.
Nope, I'm just shooting from the hip this week.
All right.
Cereal Box Turner.
How's it going, guys?
And Greg Credible Mushroom Russo.
How we doing out there?
Well, we are doing fine because it's live on twitch.tv/T-Force Podcast. And it's Sunday, shortly after 9 p.m. This week, a little bit longer after 9 p.m. as we kind of got things going. And awesome, we're all five here. This is the first Pentacast. Changing the name now. Pentacast T-Force LCS Rundown. So there
Enemy
we go.
team, Pentacast.
Good time for the first, isn't the first EU pentakill this split?
That was Reckless this week, right?
Yep.
There we go.
Bada bing.
My man.
Good timing.
Not on my fantasy league, but I
Why?
didn't play against him either, so I can't complain.
I don't know why you would not have him on your... Did he get picked up by somebody else? What's the deal?
Yeah, he got picked
I mean,
up.
it's not. You can't just pick 5 players all at once and then, okay, friends, you can have whatever's left.
I want only the best players right now. And speaking of only the best, Gatherers Granola is a great sponsor of the show. Like these transitions, these have been
That was very
really
smooth.
good.
I like that.
They have
That's
become
good.
smooth. Mitch hates them, but we love them. Lots of great flavors, great company, big supporters of the show, big fans of the show as well. You can go ahead and pick up some of this delicious granola by following bit.ly, that's bit.ly/T-Force Granola, and using the offer code TForceGG, that's in all caps, for 10% off of your order. And they're delicious, and I'd love to hold up a bag and say product promotion, but all of mine is gone because I actually eat it, unlike Mitch, who always has granola.
High definition granola this week, guys.
He's got missing granola in that bag. You can't say that.
That's true. He's just not eating it fast enough.
He's gathering
Bridget and
it.
I, it's all gone. I have a little bit in my desk stored away at work, but doesn't last because it's delicious and it's fantastic. So definitely go out and support them. They support us, and we thank them for it. Speaking of support, let's talk about, to get us started on LCS news for this week, let's talk about another game that isn't League of Legends. Let's talk about Dota 2 and making it onto television. For those of you who don't know, the 2014 Internationals for Dota was this weekend.
Still going on,
Still
I think.
going on.
It ends tomorrow.
We mentioned in previous weeks that they surpassed League of Legends for the highest prize pool. It's like a $10 million crazy prize pool. And we had a little bit of discussion as to whether or not that was a big deal or not. Still in contention, I suppose, if you want to go anything on that. But another announcement was made earlier this week. Not only do they have that high prize pool, but they're also playing on television on ESPN3. So what do you guys think about this? Is this a big deal? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing?
I think it's overall a good thing, but I am very upset that Riot is not doing this instead. I think it's going to be a massive bump for Dota to break into that more mainstream kind of thing, and it's really the evolution that Riot should want the LCS to have. Like, LCS should be on ESPN3. So Worlds should absolutely be on ESPN3.
Well, I kind of agree with that thought process. The first thing I thought of was Dodgeball, the movie, and how Dodgeball was on
Ocho.
ESPN 8, the Ocho.
Yeah.
Like, I agree.
Can't get enough of that shit.
Getting to TV and getting a broader viewing audience that may not have been exposed to the game is fantastic for Dota and something League of Legends should look forward to. but not on ESPN3. No one's going to watch that unless they pay like 70 something bajillion dollars for a specific cable package. No one has, I don't have access to that channel, and I have Verizon Fios with like 12 million HD movie channels. I don't even have ESPN3. It's always available online, and it's available through the ESPN website, which you could just watch on Twitch or buy an in-game ticket and probably have a better streaming experience. Honestly, the ESPN stream was about a minute and a half behind the Twitch stream, and it looked like it was just being rebroadcast off Twitch. So while the publicity is great, ESPN3 is not where League of Legends wants to set its sights. It wants to set it on ESPN, on NBC, on Fox. That's where it's going to get exposure.
Is that happening, though? Because right now, Dota's winning. Basically, Dota's winning the race.
There's no race for ESPN3.
They've got the bigger prize pool and the bigger exposure right now, and there's no plans that we're hearing anything from Riot to come back on that.
That's well, first off, Riot's event isn't for like 3 more months, and second off, that's like shooting yourself in the leg to win the Paraplegic Olympics.
Dude, Cartman did it and totally worked.
I'm so glad that was caught on to, actually.
I think the fact that it was on ESPN is cool. I mean, sure, it's 3. I think the people who are going to watch it on ESPN3 are maybe the younger crowd who live at their parents' house. Like, as bad as that may sound, it's actually kind of a market that a company would want to tap into because it's younger, they have more time to play games. They're going to watch it on TV, then maybe transition into playing it a little bit more, depending on the overall exposure. I don't think Riot's in trouble, really. I think this is overall a good step in the right direction for esports as a whole. But what I kind of focused in on all of this was actually the stream quality for Dota. So we watch League, and it's highly produced. You have hilarious casters. They did a great job this week, by the way. The level of comedy and the coverage throughout each of these games I enjoyed more probably this week than any other week. But we have a nicely produced show that looks great. There's minor technical issues, and overall it's pretty palatable. You can be a really great player and love to watch it and hear their commentary, or you can be somebody who's pretty much new and still be able to follow what's going on. Dota 2, and maybe I don't watch Dota 2 enough, but the stream quality, the casters, not so great. Not a lot going on there.
Well, it's also the fact that Valve produces 1 tournament a year, and the normal Dota 2 coverage you're used to is either a company like an MLG or an IEM or Beyond the Summit, who actually is kind of like, they went from being do-it-yourself kind of guys to having their own production studio now and hosting their own tournaments, which I think is awesome. So quite literally, this is Valve's first production since TI3. Mm-hmm. So there's no real, their only precedent is what they did last year, as compared to the LCS stream, where their last precedent is 5 days ago.
Right.
Go ahead. I don't play enough Dota. Like, I play Dota on occasion. I don't play enough Dota to say whether or not the Dota casters are good, like whether or not they're good at their job, because I don't understand the strategy well enough. But I really did like that they had multiple channels for their group stage. I thought that was excellent. I liked that they had a noob-friendly cast. Yep. I thought that was really cool. I know enough about Dota not to watch that cast, but I mean, it's a great idea. I like that they had the multicast. The multicast I didn't think was executed perfectly. Watching it was a little hectic and it was a little frustrating because sometimes I like to watch the downtime in the games and it gives you a break. Yeah. But I still think it's a good idea. I think the way that they did the event and the way that they set up the broadcast was good. Whether or not the execution was good, I think is arguable, though.
I did like they called it the noob cast. I did like the noob channel where if you're a brand new player, like I listened in on that for a little bit because I played Dota once and then I got made fun of for playing League of Legends, so I stopped. But they were talking about like, oh, this person's building armor so that the auto attacks, those arrows you see him shooting out, those do less damage. So it's a really noob cast, but I still think that's really great, especially since this was on television, and I don't know which version hit the ESPN side because, like Tom, I don't have ESPN3, but I think that definitely would help. At the same time, I saw at one point, I guess I chimed in. I watched for about 10 minutes, to be fair, so take that with a grain of salt. But the 10 minutes I did come in on. One of the casters took over control of the cameras and like berated the guys controlling the cameras for not showing him the stuff that he wanted to see. So growing pains for sure. Riot definitely has superiority there, and hopefully this comes out with a couple more people excited about esports, at least notoriety. I think if you're not watching either League or Dota, but you still kind of follow the scene, you at least know that there is professional esports on television, and that may make you start paying attention to more things. So, that's going to be really exciting, especially for League come Worlds, because that's when a lot of the PR is going to start picking up. Apologies, by the way, for the people in the chat on twitch.tv/tforcepodcast, hashtag everything is a plug. It does seem like we are having some video issues, but from what I'm seeing, audio seems to be fine, so just bear with us while my internet sucks. Screw you, Comcast.
So one last thing on that real quick. I'll let it go, of course.
Sure.
One thing that I've recognized from talking with some of my friends who are completely League of Legends, Dota, whatever, illiterate, don't know anything about esports. They don't understand that it's legitimate. And then I say, oh, well, the world champions last year won $1 million. They're like, whoa, that's kind of surprising. And right now, like, the front page of ESPN has that Dota championship as one of their top 5 things that you can click to. And one thing that's going to grab their attention of people who have no idea about esports is it says total purse of $10 million at stake. That's going to get everyone interested, or at least to check it out. And like you're saying, Riot will take notes on this. They will learn. They've already got the higher production, and it'll just hopefully, I don't know, snowball from there.
Yeah, and somebody, just as the very last point, somebody just brought up a very good point in our chat. ESPN, not available in Europe. So, to Greg's point, does Riot focus in on an American-only piece after being criticized so much on the fact that they're like disregarding other
if they can get it
regions?
on European channels too, that's fine. But right now we have no channels, and it doesn't matter how good the production value is if not as many people are seeing it as Riot's competition.
Sure.
Now, you do make a good point that it sort of makes people more receptive to esports in general, but I think that's the consolation prize.
Oh, yeah.
And Riot should have gone for the win.
Well, we definitely will see. We have 3 months till Worlds. This whole ESPN 3 business just hit news last week, if I'm not mistaken, or at least the beginning of this week. So there are many weeks in between now for Riot to either impress us or just stay the way they are, which will probably stay the way they are, but we'll still love them for it. Speaking of loving them for it, we have Europe. I didn't watch Europe this week. I'll just go flat out and say it. I'm going to let these guys run the discussion. I'm going to ask some really uninformed questions, but I can't wait for NA. So let's get through Europe. Take me on a magic carpet ride over to the east.
Honestly,
show me the world, Optimus Tom.
Honestly, Europe was a little dissatisfying this week. There are a couple things that were interesting, such as Roccat breaking their winning spree, Alliance breaking their losing spree, SK continuing to show that they are really bad at this game, apparently, and a lot of one-sided games, which, I mean, kind of, and not to take away from them, but it's what we're used to seeing in the NALCS when there were 2 top teams. They stomped absolutely everybody, and everybody else kind of fought for consolation of 3rd, 4th place. It's kind of shaping up to be like that right now, but
Well,
some of the
I think
teams
in fairness, just by looking at the schedule, you would sort of expect to see that this week. It hasn't been as much the case other weeks, but like you've got Alliance versus Gambit, for Christ's sake.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
no one was thinking that was going to be anything but what it was.
games like when you have SK versus Millennium, Millennium versus Roccat, Super Hot Crew against Alliance, and Super Hot Crew against Roccat, and all those teams, except for Alliance, are pretty much one standing away from each other. You don't expect those games to be complete one-sided stomps. And I think one of the games that we really want to hit upon is just to see like the level that the 2 teams are at now. Like we had Super Hot Crew coming into this. They were solidly in their 3rd place at this point when they entered the week. And after day 1, they were looking strong to kind of take that against Roccat. But when they came up against Alliance in day number 2, Alliance pulled out a composition that was extremely good on their part. The picks and bans phase worked out extremely well for them, and they dragged the game out. It was a 27-minute and 42-second first blood, and from that point forward, Super Haku looked like they didn't even play that game for the first 30 minutes.
Yeah, and to touch on that, Alliance's team comp that game was almost identical to the team comp they played the day prior against Gambit. It was consisted of Gragas top lane, Riven jungle, a little bit of a controversial pick, but one that did incredibly well. Tabs, I think, was sorry, I don't even remember their jungler name.
Yeah, Shook.
Shook, thank you. I get the new players mixed up.
I missed the
Shook.
Riven jungle.
You missed our two
Riven.
games of Riven jungle?
Riven jungle?
That could be
Most
described
successful.
as solo queue stomps. The Ready Trios were so good. Yeah, only one death, and I think the team's only death in that game, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, which is crazy. And then they had Xerath mid along with a Corki 80 carry, and the only pick that changed was their support, which switched between Braum and Thresh in the 2 games. And it was an amazing comp. I mean, they played it perfectly. They played very patient. They never fought fights that they weren't going to win, that they knew they weren't going to win. They had Gragas for disengage. They had Braum and Thresh for disengage. And then they had this immense amount of poke in the mid game between Corki and Xerath. And I didn't understand the Riven pick. Like, I didn't really get it. It was cool. It was working okay. I didn't really get it until one of the last team fights where everyone is getting poked really low, and they're all trying to defend the turret, and they really want to defend this turret. And then the Riven flash engage combined with the Gragas flash barrel is insanely powerful. And suddenly this team of like 5 people safe under a turret die immediately, instantly. And it goes from being this game of back and forth where Alliance pokes and backs off and pokes and backs off and literally do not engage any fight. Like, almost they engage like 3 fights that entire game, and every fight they engage looks exactly the same, and it's poke back off, and then something goes off and they kill everybody in an instant. And it's amazing. It was a really fun game to watch if you're into the strategy behind a poke comp and watching a poke comp play. But to everyone else, it was probably really boring because they literally did nothing for 30 minutes.
So comparing these games this week for Alliance to the Alliance that we've seen recently, where it's been a lot of losses and a lot of inconsistency, how do you really see this week kind of factoring in for the next 2 weeks coming up to playoffs in terms of Alliance's ability to keep this #1 spot?
Well, they got Fnatic next week, so that's going to be
The big one.
Well, it's huge,
gonna be
especially if they're only a game apart right now. But if Alliance wins, it puts them essentially 2.5 games up because they'll win the series 3-1 and have that tiebreaker. So that's Fnatic needs this game, and I mean they're on a 8-game winning streak. Yeah,
Yeah, they're
if they
15
keep
and
that
7
up.
currently.
Yeah, if they keep that up, if they win against Alliance, it becomes a completely tied top of the table.
They'll
I
also
think it's
tie their
interesting.
old winning streak record at 9 games. They
Yeah.
said it
And then-
last spring.
And then Millennium, who's looking pretty good, went 2-0 this week. That's Fnatic's other game. My bad. Alliance has Wolves.
Last time they played, they got stomped by the Wolves, but that might
True.
be an anomaly.
I don't predict a repeat of that one.
I'm concerned. I think Alliance is putting on the gas, and they're obviously like they don't want to lose again. But the fact that they played the same team comp twice, and obviously it worked out for them and it was really effective, makes me wonder if this wasn't just like this is their cheese. This is the cheese that worked for the week. And I mean, it wasn't really cheese. It was a good team comp, and they played it really well. But when another team figures it out, you know, is this what's carrying them? Is this excellent team comp that they're pretty good at playing, or are they just playing at the top of their game and being smart about how they're playing?
I'm not so certain that it's something that they're going to fall back on consistently. One of the things they did at the beginning of the Super Hot Crew versus Alliance game is they had a listen in where they've been doing that a little bit more frequently. Just normally it's kind of funny and they just kind of laugh about like what the picks, or Mimer hangs his head in shame when he has to play against a Yorick pick or something like that. But this week there's actually a really good one where Tabs kind of goes in the listen in, hey guys, there's something really familiar about this composition. And then Wicked's like, holy shit, it's the exact same comp we had last game. How did that happen? And they're just like, well, if they're going to give it to us, we're going to play it. But it sounds like they have a different idea in mind if they get it banned away. But it looks like if you're just going to give it to them, that they're just going to keep taking it.
Sure. We also saw TSM a few times this week practice brand new comps. So maybe now that at this point, some of especially for teams like Alliance, especially since the playoff positions are a bit secured, this is the time to throw out some crazy comps, some new things that you want to try to get ready for playoffs and to get ready for Worlds, if that's what you have your eyes set on.
We saw a lot of new champions this week. I mean, Xerath is obviously hugely popular. He got picked in the majority of games. Nidalee got picked a few times in EU and picked a lot in NA. Picked a lot.
With varying success, mind you. But
yeah, it's true. I think it's picked as a counter to the Gragas top lane. I'm not really a top laner, and that's not a matchup I particularly know analytically.
There was talk actually, and this is jumping ahead a little bit, but it was a CLG LMQ discussion because that matchup was played, and apparently how it's supposed to go, according to like really, really pro top laners, is if it's left alone, Nidalee should eventually win that matchup, but if you just get jungle pressure even a little bit, it can really, really snowball away from Nidalee.
New Nidalee is by nature, I think, a lane bully, and she does need a lead. Kind of like Renekton needs a lead to just like stomp a lane. If she gets behind, it's really tough for her to come back, I think, in that regard. So it does make sense that jungle pressure would be the linchpin in that operation.
And while she has been remade a little bit to make it a little bit more sustainable in the lane phase, she still has some glaring weaknesses that the old Nidalee had, where even though you have a self-heal and you have a way to get away, pre-level 6, you're still not necessarily the best at wave clearing, especially because you have your cat form now. You have to put yourself in danger pre-level 6. You can't heal yourself in cat form, and your abilities don't deal all too much damage. So even though she does have a little bit more mobility in the laning phase, her wave clear and the things that did keep her down pre-6 before the rework are still pretty evident. So if you get a stun on her, like with a Gragas Belly Slam, and combined it with a Lee Sin who could jump and stick onto her after she pounces away, there are those glaring weaknesses that make her a little bit weaker until she gets going. We saw in a Dignitas game later on that once Zion Spartan got a kill, Nidalee she couldn't be touched. But if she's on the receiving end of the death, completely opposite. It's almost like a Jax versus Aurelia from Season 2.
You guys are getting me really excited about NA because a lot of this stuff bleeds over. So let's just keep going with EU so we can get there.
I think we have at least one more team we definitely have to touch upon in EU, and it's going to be Millennium.
Well, before we get there, I do just want to hit on two minor points. The roster changes that we saw come through for Gambit Gaming and Copenhagen Wolves, as somebody just brought that up in the Twitch chat. Again, that's twitch.tv/TForce Podcast, shortly after 9 p.m. Sundays Eastern. What did we see? I mean, Gambit, we already beat this one to death, but Gambit is a lost cause. We understand that. At least until we start talking about relegations and that becomes a real thing. But how about Copenhagen Wolves? How did their two swap outs fare them this week? They did pull off one win at least. I've
really got to say, even though Airwax was extremely mechanically skilled and I'm not necessarily sold on Broken Shard being a better option, Broken Shard did exactly what he had to do for the Wolves to win their second game. Like he stayed in the jungle and distracted Svenskeren long enough so he could die and transfer a blue buff over to Soren XD, the new mid laner for them, as Orianna, and was able to dominate the matchup against Jesus and effectively took SK's mid lane out of the game. He was where he needed to be on Jarvan. He was like 1, 2, and 14. So that kind of speaks to where he's going to be going. Soren looked a little bit shaky in his first game on Rise, but he was also on a weak laner and a hyper-scaling late-game carry against a very powerful team. So that wasn't necessarily the best. He had to go up against Xpeke and Fnatic in the first game. But the second game is Orianna got a small lane advantage in the form of an early blue buff at like level 4 and never lost a lane after that. I think it was like 5-1 and 6, and his shockwaves were pretty on point in that game. So I have to say the two players over there overall think it's a pretty big team upgrade. And they might suffer from Gambit syndrome, though, because looking at the loss against Fnatic, it was a little bit of stuck in my way kind of thing. We had Youngbuck avoided a gank after teleporting back in from First Blood, avoided dying and almost picked up a kill, and then continued to build towards Blade of the Rune King when he needed to be the tank for the team. So there's still a little bit of that stubbornness in there, but all in all, Copenhagen Wolves, they've been on the up and up ever since they started winning games, and I think they're going to continue that trend, but I don't know if it's enough to get 6th place at this point.
Well, isn't that, you said team upgrade, and I'm pretty sure Broken Shard's now their new shot caller, isn't he? Because they showed some videos of him just yelling through team fights and making great calls, and so I think that's going to help. I mean, if you don't have a good shot caller, that's already just a huge negative for a team. So bringing him over, being a vocal leader is, I think, going to be one of the biggest impacts that you won't necessarily see just from watching the games.
I'm not convinced. I think that, you know, SK played terribly this week. SK played really poorly, and I think that the sample size is too small to be sure. Like, looking forward, it does look hopeful. Broken Shard does look like he's a pretty good shot caller. Soren seems like a pretty good mid laner. Like, he did have a great Orianna matchup, and being shaky against Xpeke in your first professional, well, when you're one of your first professional games, is a pretty big surprise, or is not a surprise at all. Right. Xpeke is like the European god of mid lane. Of course, you're going to be intimidated.
I'm sorry, I thought you said Xpeke instead of Overpower for a second, but I must be hearing things.
All right.
I think Daniel's right. The sample size is a bit small. Even if he's fantastic improvement for them, it's such a big shift in terms of that team, and especially if he's taking over shot calling duties. Even if he's the best shot caller, it's going to take a little bit of time for them to get used to him. I mean, you saw how much of an impact it was when Cloud9 had to transition from high to link back to high. So it's obviously going to be an issue. I think probably they're not going to make much of a splash for this split. It's getting way too late.
Well, Greg, you called almost every match, and I think actually every match in the spring split with 100% certainty.
That is correct, yes.
Call it for Copenhagen Wolves. Are they going to be back next split? Do you think this new team comp that they have is at least get out of relegation free card?
Perhaps not get out of relegation 3. I think they'll struggle.
Sure.
But I do have a feeling they will probably overcome the relegation opponent. I think it's going to be a close series, but I got to give my faith to them. I think there's enough time between now and then for this new team to gel. And I do think Broken Shard's a tremendous player. Certainly, the potential is there to be better than any of the challenger teams in Europe that I'm aware of. So
it's going to be so hard, though. If they
it's going to be hard. Oh yeah,
they need to stay out of last place because H2K and NIP keep trading the title back and forth of best challenger team in EU for a while, and it's looking like H2K is the one to go to. And I don't know, like it's so difficult to count out a team that's led by Ko and Alex Ich, as well as another team that does well. It's like, it's so hard. I want to say the Copenhagen Wolves can avoid relegation, but they really need to like win out on this, like as many games as possible, I think, to even have a shot.
I think even if they lose out in relegation, we might even see them in the next split if we're going up to 10 teams, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think they definitely would make it in the threshold in 10 teams. And I think that they have a decent chance. I think that the challenger teams are scary, but if they ever have to play against Gambit to keep their spot in the LCS, if they have to like requalify and play, they're going to stomp Gambit because I think Gambit's considerably worse than they are.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, even if they do terribly, I still think Gambit is probably going to end out in last place. So they're not going to face the best challenger team. So you're looking at the second best challenger team. I think Copenhagen Wolves has a fair shot at doing that. Because I really don't see them ending down. Yeah, there's two, but
like at this point in time, your second best challenger team is Alex Ich, Ko, and Ninjas in Pajamas.
As good as Alex Ich is, I actually don't think that highly of the new NIP team.
You got Freeze and Ko and Cabbage Shard.
Well, let's.
I don't know. I got to put my faith on the Wolves. Like I said, it's going to be a tight series, but they will pass. That's
and
my
you need to howl when they go throughout relegation. Or right now.
Speaking of howling, let's push on to Millennium as we wrap up our European discussions.
Millennium, we said Alliance might be a little bit of a cheesy comp or a one-trick pony with the composition they ran this week. Millennium's been doing it the whole split, and they're still looking pretty good. The first game of the week, they came up against SK, and even though SK is in a slump, they were in the lead for about the first 25 minutes or so. They took a fight in a dragon around the 27-minute mark, and then Millennium got a counter gank on the mid lane, took a bunch of towers. SK got into a bad fight after that because they misjudged how much gold they were actually ahead. Millennium ran away with that. Millennium steal a Baron, and all of a sudden SK loses the game. So Millennium kind of had this formulaic way of playing the game. Whether they're ahead or behind, they get a pick on a fight, transition that fight into an objective or an objective steal, and then get into a big fight and wind up winning out because they've had a Baron, they've caught up in gold, or they've warded properly. It's the way Millennium goes. If they have an advantage, they'll do the same exact thing. The game just ends so much quicker, though, because they have a gold lead already.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is due to the comps that they pick. I mean, their first game they picked Aatrox, Elise, Xerath, Leona, and Corki. I mean, like it's naturally a strong stun comp. If you go to gank top, you have a stun with Elise stun follow up. If you go to gank mid, you have a stun with Elise stun follow up. I mean, bot lane is of course an all-in lane, and I think that they really like having they build these team comps with a little bit of poke, but with a lot of catch power. Like they really like running pick comps, and I think you're completely right.
So, the beginning of the split, Millennium was really hit or miss. I mean, they had a couple of good wins in there. But overall, for a while, they were really riding the bottom of the tier. Now that they've kind of moved up, really tied for third place, what's working for them right now as a team? And what are they going to be able to take? Because, I mean, we're not really... I guess at this point, we kind of are talking World's Contention, aren't we? It is three teams to be sent.
It's World's Contention, it's relegations. I think we're at the point in the split where that's what we need to focus on.
Right. I mean, where do you... Given that we're seeing a really inconsistent Roccat, and I'm working up through the ranks here, not Copenhagen Wolves or Gambit.
Let's be fair. Roccat are consistently good or bad. They won a game and lost a game to start the split,
We
and
just
then
call that inconsistent, but
they've lost 6 games in a row, won 4 games in a row, lost 3 games in a row, won 5 games in a row, and now they're on a 2-game losing streak again. They've never been up and down.
Sure, so following Roccat theory, they're just going to lose the rest of the games.
Yeah, at least 2 more games.
They're going to lose 2 more games
Super
and
Week.
then win out in Super Week. Exactly.
Yep,
That's what Roccat will do.
Okay, so not looking good for Roccat. SK's on this weird slump that I can't even define. I couldn't crack open SK. I don't know the European side scene well enough to crack open SK and tell you exactly what's going wrong for them. But they just, it's been terrible. What are the chances? What are the chances that SK moves into a relegation spot?
Very unlikely at this point.
But who does? Who does? There's 6.
Roccat.
There's one of 6 teams that's going to get pushed down to relegation. Is it going to be Roccat?
To be honest, I think it's going to be Roccat or Millennium. The way I'm looking at the standings right now, it's really going to be a toss-up between Millennium or Super Hot Crew. And the team that doesn't take third place, in the normal standings, I think is going to be the one fighting for relegation.
Because they'll play probably SK in the first round.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that could completely change, of course. We still got 6 games left.
Yeah, but I'm not 100% sure. I like what Millennium is doing. They played pretty well, and it seems like they've figured out a lot of their strategic issues and their macro game issues. If they can keep it together, they've cut out a lot of their inconsistency problems. If they can keep it together, I imagine that the standings we see right now, with them in third place, will maybe them in fourth. That's probably what we're going to see as the split ends. However, maybe they just drop it. Maybe they aren't consistent. Maybe I'm completely wrong, and they throw it all away, which is kind of the Millennium MO. It's just like most of these EU teams in the middle, they're just completely inconsistent. Or consistently inconsistent in the case of Roccat.
Oh, and just a heads up for the whole 4-0 Super Week Roccat. They only have to play Alliance, Fnatic.
They got this.
What's the other one? Super Hot Crew and Wolves.
Just over.
Newer Wolves. They'll be fine. They got it.
They
got it. They got it.
So
this is
finishing off the European discussion, and we're going to do this at the end of each split discussion. I just decided this right now. Top 3 teams, you got to pick 3. Who are you taking to Worlds from Europe, Greg?
I think that's actually a lot easier for Europe than it is for North America.
Right.
I will take Alliance, Fnatic, and I will actually take SK.
Okay, Dan, I'm going to screw Optimus Tom on this one. I'm going to take Dan on this one, and then Mitch and Optimus Tom can take North America in addition to me because I get to play too. Dan, who do you have for...
You just don't want me to pull out a train whistle for Super Hot Crew. I got one somewhere.
Hey, no, I'm on that train. I got Mr. Alls and I got Selfie on my fantasy. I'm totally on that train. They're my summoner icon right now in League. True
Mine's
story.
a bronze cup.
So who do you got, Dan? Who's your number 3? Because if you say anybody but Alliance and Fnatic for the first two.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's not even a question. I don't even know why
Right.
this is a
So
group. We
who's
should just
your
each
third?
say one.
Who's your third?
It's Super Hot Crew. I think the Millennium's good, but I think that when it
man.
comes down to it, Super Hot Crew has the better infrastructure and the better support staff to. Oh my god.
Well, we can't take a train over to North America, but we're going to do that right now. So let's shift our
We
focus.
can't do this. Well,
Mitch,
we're gonna
Mitch
do
just,
it anyway.
Mitch just has
No,
this
no.
scowl on
we
his
can't
face
do
for
that
those of you who are
yet.
listening.
Somebody,
Someday, girl,
unfortunately, the
someday.
video stream isn't working right now, but somebody needs to go through and cut like a 10-minute YouTube video.
Super cut of my reactions to your transitions.
Every
No.
time I say something.
No,
I
it's
just
only
want
the
the look on
transitions.
Mitch's
It's only the
face is just
segues.
like-
Only
Little-
the segues.
The corny segues. I just want just Photoshop, cut out a picture of his face, put it on a little piece of paper or a little piece of cardboard, and just wear it like a mask. And we can
What
all
we
just
need-
hold up. We can all hold up our little scowling cereal box masks
We need to
whenever there's a
do-
bad transition.
We need to do an episode with me and DeClaude, the Instalock mid throwback, and you and Dom, Mitch.
Oh god, he'll blink a lot, and I'll just
The slow blink and the scowl. Little known fact, by the way, DeClaude and I used to podcast on the Instalock Mid podcast way back in the day. All right, North America. Loved everything about this week. Some major upsets, and then upsets based on the assumptions made by those upsets. And honestly, I don't know even where to begin. Let's begin day
I do.
one.
Let's start with Curse and Dig because I didn't see that one coming at all.
No,
I
it
didn't
did.
even see that game. I saw
I
every game
totally
but
did.
that one. So
It
get
was
it.
it
Give
was
it
a
to
very
me.
enjoyable game. Dig has been a favorite of mine for this split, and Curse I had written them off because I love X Special. He's one of my favorite players of any split. Excuse me, of any LCS division,
Yep.
any team for sure. But his impact on Curse has just been like non-existent, except recently because they've been doing pretty good.
I'll disagree with you there. I think he's definitely. There's definitely been a ton of games where his positive side, when he gets into that positive attitude that he couldn't get onto with TSM, I definitely think he's an awesome playmaker as the support, and he's been the reason for a few of their wins for sure.
But he has had no one to really make plays with.
Sure,
You know what I mean?
Cop's probably nearing the age where he should retire, but sometimes, especially when you start bringing in
Hold
what
22.
Cop's nearing the skill level where he should have retired
That's what I'm-
3
Okay,
years
the
ago.
age, I
He's not
consider
very
that
good at League of
age.
Legends compared to other competitive players. Obviously, he's
Cop
better
is
than me.
Cop is consistent, but the issue is I think Voyboy as a mid laner not as competitive compared to the other mid laners in North America.
unless you give him Yasuo.
You're right.
Hold on.
And Quas was and Dominate just were not making impacts, but Quas has really stepped his game up.
Quas
Like-
is okay.
He's
I don't love Quas as a
he
top.
was
I
not
like Voyboy
doing
better as a
very
top
well
laner.
recent. Like not recently, but like at the first half of the split, I would say Quas Dominate practically non-existent.
I think it's Quas getting used to competitive top lane. Really, I think that's what it comes down to because he doesn't have a whole ton of experience, and solo lane or solo queue top lane is literally a vacuum. You sit in that lane with one other person, and maybe a jungler comes, maybe they don't, and you pretty much live in that lane your whole life, your whole life of the game. And then when you transition into a League of Legends meta competitively that is full of teleport flash top laners, you have to have a much better sense of like the game as a whole. And his top lane sense is obviously there. He never does too poorly in lane, but now that he's finally understanding how to use teleport appropriately, it really feels like he is starting to make an impact for the team.
Yeah, he's
Say
gone
it
from
again.
not too poorly to holding himself actually pretty even to the point that when it does come time to transition, his team fighting skills are showing. He isn't losing lane, like at the very least, he's going, even maybe he'll drop a kill. But it's allowing so much more freedom for Dominate to put pressure in other lanes, to get Voyboy going, to get the bot lane going. And I think that's starting to pay dividends because, Dig was not playing at their top form either, but Curse, if it wasn't for the game where they just lost the next day, I would have said they were on a freight train of their own because they have been on a bit of a streak.
If you didn't see that game where Curse lost to Cloud9, that could have gone either way. But let's focus in on this game first. So what was it really that caused Dig to lose this game? Because Dig's been very, very inconsistent. They've fallen to the middle of the ground. They had a good game today, but what gave them problems this day one?
I couldn't point to any one thing. I would just say there was a general feeling of passivity. They could not make anything happen, really. They seemed very reactive to what Curse was doing. Curse definitely controlled the tempo and pace of the game. And while it was not a blowout, I think in hindsight, there really wasn't much, oh, look, Dig could win here or over here. There was never really a time when I felt like Curse was in jeopardy of losing.
Sure.
And it was just a matter of time before Curse knocked on enough doors to break it down, basically. And if I had to put it in simple terms, that would be it. There wasn't any one team fight, I think, that I could point to that would be like, oh, this is the point where they just completely dominated. It was just from the very start of the game, there was just a general feeling of blah. There was no aggression. There was no tenacity. It just seemed everything was going Curse's way in tiny increments. And while Dig was keeping it close, they weren't taking an advantage.
It was the polar opposite of the game they played today against Evil Geniuses. Crumbs was pretty much not in the game against Curse. He didn't do much of anything in the early game for Dignitas. I don't think he ganked a lane. Like, he might have gone to gank a lane and maybe gotten warded out or just backed away, but I don't think he was physically in a lane trying to set up kills whatsoever. His vision control, which is normally his strong point, was a little bit shoddy, and that may have been due to Curse moving around the map a little bit better, but Crumbs literally had zero impact. When Crumbs has zero impact, the casters pointed it out in the pregame. Shifter, while he does okay in the 1v1 matchup, his opponents have their best farming games against him. And he was against the matchup he didn't quite understand. He wound up going up against an AD Tristana in the mid lane.
Which is a really cool pick.
He was behind by 15 CS at the 10-minute mark, and it extended up into the 20-minute mark. There was no kill pressure on what should be a fairly weak, even though she has a jump. It's Tristana, who's known for a shoddy lane phase in the mid game. Between 10 and 20 minutes, there was no kill pressure on that lane. Zion Spartan was left to his own devices, and eventually Quas was able to 1v1 him, Lulu against Nidalee. And it just devolved to the point where Dignitas, like you said, they didn't do anything, and they never threatened Curse's lead.
And then it came down to one team fight, basically, at the end, where finally Curse got all the resets for Tristana and, Jinx. And their turret push was so fast that that's really all they needed.
Realistically, you can't go even against a double AD carry comp. Like, you have to punish them for picking champions that are squishy early game, for champions that are weak defensively. And they didn't. And so even if they had gotten a lead, even if they, had gone back and forth, even if Crumbs had managed to do something, they really needed to push. They really needed to force objectives. They needed to get a huge lead themselves, because the inevitable scaling coming out of a Tristana and a Jinx backed up by a Lulu, you're not gonna win that game. You're not gonna win those team fights, because either one of those characters can kill all 5 people on your team if left alone for 10 seconds.
And I think that cuts to the core of kind of what Dignitas as a team is facing right now, because it seems like their biggest problem comes into those out of left field calls, or basically when their plan doesn't get to be fully executed perfectly and they can't recover. It seems like as a team they fall apart. Their win today, day 2, against Evil Geniuses, to me, was one of the worst things that could have happened to them, believe it or not, because they had a comp, they stuck to it, they executed it perfectly, and Evil Geniuses did not even get a single kill off of them. Dignitas right now is a team that has 2 new players. They're still learning a lot. They're still having to go back and reflect on mistakes. And in that game versus Evil Geniuses, I'm looking over my notes now, I can't put a single finger on a Dignitas mistake.
Level 1.
Was that a mistake?
They got bullied out of their positioning by Blue Buff, and Cutie Pie had to go around through the river, and they wound up being under their tower with a 1 bar of HP Lucian, but Helios didn't go down quick enough.
No. See, a lot of people are really, I say a lot of people, I heard the casters mention it a bunch. A lot of people focused in on Cutie Pie and Kiwi Kid that game because they were under their turret for pretty much the entire time. But when you look at the counter jungle, Elise, first of all, for those who didn't get to watch that game, Zion as Nidalee and Crumbs as top, or Crumbs as Nunu stayed top essentially the whole time. That was the lane. Zion, middle of the game, ends up being 4-0. They, as a team, secure first blood. And this is the sustained top lane. This is essentially AD carry Nidalee with Nunu's support just sitting top lane. And they absolutely dominated. They kept, I think the matchup was against Aurelia, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
They kept Aurelia from being able to do anything. In meantime, Helios, and we'll touch upon the EG game next, the one that they beat against CLG. I think that's a really good transition at this point. Helios had a great impact in the CLG game, but Helios in this game sucked dick.
He didn't do anything.
Elise now with the recent patch changes have been focusing in a lot on heavy damage builds. She can get a lot more for her bang for buck for magic. That means you don't have an overly tanky Elise. That means your Crumbs and your Kiwi Kid stuck under their tower, their tower there can't be dove because they're a Braum Lucian under their tower. You can't gank that lane.
Counter argument. You're Elise and have repel. You're the easiest tower diving jungler in the game.
I think
it's not as easy
more
as
about.
It could be.
It's true, but I think it's more. Elise has probably still the strongest level 3 tower dive in the game. I mean, it's really powerful.
I won't disagree, but against a Braum and a Lucian where you can rack up that stun so quick because of Braum's double tap there, you're not going to... Okay, and I see you guys motioning in for it. First of all, A, it didn't happen, so there you go. And B, it's not as effective as it could be. And when it finally did come to the point where it's like, all right, let's have a big fight bottom, it was Dignitas pushing everything down there, them walking through EG, taking Dragon, and then if I can put my finger on exactly where that fight went down, they end up getting a ton more base off that engagement anyway.
I was gonna go out and say I think it has to do with Helios' decision making in that game. Sure. One of the things we said, Lucian was under tower with 1 bar of HP at level 1.
Yep.
When Lucian blows through his health potion, has 1 bar of HP and is still alive under tower, and you have Elise who hit level 3 with her double buffs that could dive that tower easily, and you don't capitalize on it. There's a first mistake. Okay, so maybe you didn't go down there. Second mistake is Elise is across the map, not helping that bottom lane that could have gotten first blood while her top laner dies her first blood. Then Elise goes up top and ganks the losing lane repeatedly and doesn't get anything out of it. Meanwhile, the advantage you had in the bottom lane gets completely turned around because you focus so much on top lane, giving Nidalee so much extra kills and so much extra pressure. When she teleports down there and has 3 kills already, your gank in the bottom lane you finally do goes completely wrong and you lose your only advantage you've had that game.
I don't think his decision making is wrong. Honestly, I think he is screwed over by the Nunu jungle pick, and by that functionally what is a duo top. Nunu Nidalee is one of the fastest pushing pairs of champions. I mean, 2 attack speed steroids against a mana-based champion with mediocre wave clear. If Elise doesn't go top, that tower is dead. No questions. That tower is dead. And the second tower will die too, because both of those champions are so absurdly good at pushing. I think I agree on the first gank that he needed to go bot when they were low, when he had that free tower dive. But after that, he has to be top. Nunu jungle is, I mean, so ridiculously oppressive early game. I mean, and scaling into late game, I wasn't a huge fan of the pick because they paired it with a Lucian. But early game, they played it perfectly. They applied so much pressure with that pick, and it forces Helios' hand. And I think the issue there is more shot calling as a team and deciding how to interact with the Nunu pick, as opposed to Helios as an individual choosing where to go.
I don't think Helios had enough of effect on that top lane to really justify all of the inaction that happened in the rest of the jungle. Let's say you can't step into that top lane against Zion, Spartan, and Crumbs. Even if you have to let that push forward, you should at least be down bottom securing Dragon Vision, and they had none. Indignitas took everything in this game. There was nothing. Literally, there was no kills on Evil Geniuses. They couldn't do anything. I mean, I respect the problems that Helios had to face, and coming off their really great win off CLG, this is definitely a hard game for them to take. But just to kind
It's a
of
pretty good transition, though.
perfect transition, this game did nothing for Dignitas. That's a Mitch approved transition.
Didn't have a pun. Of course, it's Mitch approved.
I'll disagree that it
Wasn't
didn't do
inorganic.
anything for
Greg
Dig.
tested, Mitch approved.
I
enjoy it.
disagree it didn't do anything for Dig. I think Dig needs to learn how to do that second game every game.
No.
So
I
if they
think-
can hang on to it, okay.
They need to
I
learn.
think-
They proved that in the first half of the split. They can do really well, and they can be this awesome team, and the people will love them. But if they can't adapt to in-game problems and losses and move forward, which is what got them to the point where they are today, they're exactly where they are today. But speaking
Crumbs.
of where we are today, no Crumbs comments, Dan. We're done.
All right, I'll save it. All right, it's gonna come
EG.
back to get you.
EG and CLG. Wow. That was not a game I expected. Greg, you really wanted to talk about this one. Or actually, no, Mitch
wanted to talk.
I want
Yeah.
to talk about the LMQ game more than this one.
All right, well, we'll go through this quickly then, because we are approaching 10 o'clock here, which is disappointing because we're not even close to being done. EG, this is where Helios actually did.
He did very well.
Very well.
He did the Nunu. And then they took it away from him
Right.
on
It was
in
a
the
lot
next
of,
game.
It was a lot of gank pressure. They were able to take pretty much every kill that they were able to secure and turn that into at least one other objective, taking dragons, taking turrets. What CLG reverted to was individual skill. Let me, as Link, TF ult into a group of EG players and try to blow them up, but get blown up in the process. And that just did nothing for them. I don't know what happened with CLG. I don't know why they let themselves get into this position. Was it just EG channeling everything they should be as a team and skill-wise? I mean, Crepo did great that game as well, getting pretty much every Morg binding that you could ever want. But CLG just kind of fell flat on their face twice this week.
At the worst possible time.
At the worst possible time.
CLG made a couple of big mistakes. One, they didn't take an ignite against a Mundo top laner. Pretty much after their mess ups in the early and mid game, just sealed their fate. And on top of that, I mean, I don't think NA teams are particularly good against playing against the Nunu jungle and responding to the amount of pressure that Nunu jungle provides. Because basically, if Nunu's played well, he can either help you fast push a lane or he can completely shut out the enemy jungler from farm and XP. So when you're playing against a Nunu, you have to be incredibly decisive. You have to say, okay, I'm going to give up a bunch of XP, but I'm going to gank this lane, and if it goes well, perfect. You know, like, I can come back, I can keep up with this Nunu. But if you mess up, if you go to a lane and the gank doesn't work successfully, Nunu's that much farther ahead. And while he's not the most powerful champion, when he has a lead, I mean, when any champion has as big of a lead as Nunu can generate, they're gonna be able to stomp people. And I think that's what we see, is the Nunu pick being really powerful and really hard to deal with.
Well, the one interesting thing I also found about Helios' Nunu play was that Nunu is kind of this revered counter jungler because you can just go through and you almost have two smites with his consume. I mean, the sustain that you get from that is great. And then you have the smite power, so you can much more effectively take down minion camps. But at no time, really, did I feel like... wow, I just blanked on CLG's jungler's name. And I'm actually gonna have to go back and check. Yeah, Dexter. Wow, playing Elise. At no point was Elise too far behind to where they couldn't catch up. It's just he was so present in lanes as well as trying to do the counter jungle thing that it really threw CLG off kilter. And then they just went with that pointless aggression that let me get a hashtag LCS big play and come back from the game. And they just never got it together.
I feel like they get full of themselves and then they get knocked back down and they're like, okay, well, we still have to try and we still have to be, really put in the effort to play League of Legends. And then they get full of themselves again and then they get knocked back down. That's what it seems like. That's what it feels like.
You know what you're talking about right now? You're talking about TSM last split. You're me last split talking about fucking CLG now.
I was going to say Fnatic, but I'm not surprised that you tied it back into TSM.
I really hope that's not the case because I like CLG. If I invest money into a summoner icon for a team, I expect them to do well, and I love them, and I want them to do well. And I bought CLG this week, even though they lost all those games. Well, I bought it before they lost, but I hope they do good. I want to see them go to Worlds.
If I spend the leftover RP I have from buying a skin on your team's icon, I expect you to perform.
Yeah. So that kind of brings us over to LMQ versus CLG. And for those of you who listened last week, you'll know that this week pretty much is all super important games for North America. I mean, when we did our games to watch for next week, we pretty much just listed off everything for North America. So LMQ versus CLG.
This was just such a huge game, and I mean, it was pretty much a roller coaster. Like I wouldn't say it went back and forth because LMQ was in the lead for most of the game, if not all. And despite a few plays at the end, towards the end, when CLG was down by a lot, they were down a significant amount. Had 2 double lift quadra kills that gave CLG fans like myself a good bit of hope.
He had 2 quadra kills, yeah.
They still didn't pull it off. They had a pretty bad Baron throw, fairly early in the game, only like 25 minutes in or so.
To put it into perspective, for those who didn't get to watch that game, at 20 minutes, CLG was ahead by 500 gold, which is dirt. It's just nothing. It's almost inoperable.
Doran's Blade.
Probably a ward or 2.
At 24 minutes, LMQ is up 11k gold.
Woo. Yep. Well, that's what happens. They ended up in a comp against a comp with a Gragas TF that has a significant amount of burst magic AoE damage. Mm-hmm. And if you're inside of a Baron pit, when Baron gives you that debuff that makes you take a ton of extra magic damage, you're going to get blown up when the enemy team shows up. And that's exactly what happened. Suddenly there was a Gragas barrel killing everybody.
But it's not like TF has a global ulti that lets him show up places. He just went back. He just went back. You don't understand. It was totally safe.
And the best, wow, the fucking jungler for LMQ. I am
no name,
no
Perfect.
vision, no name, no vision. Lee Sin, the kick into the air smite on Baron to steal that was amazing, and I hope that was that game, just based off
that was, I believe,
Tom's reaction. I'm watching you guys this week for your reactions. That's really what turned it around, because LMQ steals it, aces CLG, then goes and takes, tier 2 mid tower and just pushes through. But there was still a ton of game after that as well. I
really like the Orianna Rengar combo. I think it's clever. I think it can work really well, and I'm really sad it didn't. I'm sad it didn't work out in the long run.
The problem is that is a combo where you super need to focus on mid lane, and they didn't get Zhao Weizhao nearly enough with that combo. He was just able to evade it the whole time. And for some reason this week, Zhao Weizhao has been just not even deciding to hit gold cards for TF. He's always red cards for some reason. And
no, there was talk about that.
The early game strategy with red cards is the slow is longer than the stun is, and the slow is more valuable.
Versus 1.
There you go. So there is a little bit of
blue card, the late game blue card. That was a mistake. No one can argue that. But the early game red cards, there is a strategy. Sure. I mean, he's consistently pulling them. I think that's the strategy he has in mind.
Sure.
Clearly, he pulled the late game blue card to channel his inner Reginald to beat CLG.
He's like, I really want to throw. Let me channel Reginald.
Well, one other thing about that comp that LMQ had was also a pretty big isolation comp, or it can be. They had Lee Sin for displacement, they had Gragas for displacement, and then Thresh to catch whoever got taken out. And if you go after CLG, you can take out Doublelift. If you can get rid of him, that's it. That's pretty much their strategy. And that's what happened in that early fight, that Baron fight, is he got taken out super early. And if they can, like, I just isolate him, it's done. That game, team fight is done. And
perfect example of that is when the game was done, Xiao Wei Zhao ults right next to their Nexus and then decides to kill everybody but Doublelift. Doublelift gets another quadra kill, and the game goes on for like another, 5 minutes, I think? Because they just got crushed, and CLG was able to push them through.
Honestly, CLG's pick ban phase is really weird. They picked Orion or Rengar, which is very much like a team fight based comp, or at least picks. Like, you're either going for picks or team fights with that amount of burst. And they got a couple picks off before throwing a Baron. But then Nidalee top was really odd to me. And I know we kind of talked about how people consider it a counter to Gragas. But when Gragas and Lee Sin can kick away the Rengar who's trying to leap into your team, Nidalee does nothing. In those team fights. Nidalee does 0. And I think that the big issue there was the few opportunities where they could have come back, Nidalee didn't nearly do enough.
But that's Seraph's main champion. He did so much with it.
You can't do too much when you have Ackerman just channeling his inner Gragas god.
Also, Doublelift flashed.
Play.
Doublelift flashed for a Tristana kill on Vasily. Flashed for an auto attack to try to get the reset, but he flashed into 2 people and immediately died.
I can run away fast enough, totally.
If I flash and get this kill, I'll get to run away. And then he just died.
I think this week was a big week for LMQ because now you're going to have all of the Ackerman top fanboys. Because when you can shut down a Doublelift after, I mean, he was the 4th kill in the quadra kill, but he did manage to essentially completely 1v1 Doublelift.
He killed Doublelift and died to red buff.
Yeah,
is what
he died
happened.
to the red buff. He took down Seraph pretty much by himself, just by being Gragas with no buffs, no other attention and fights, and went 11-2 and 8 on that game. He just had stupid next level play.
I'm really sad about this.
Why are you sad about this?
Because Gragas top, no one played it in solo queue, and now everyone's going to play it, and it's actually busted. I actually think it's busted.
People have been playing it in solo queue before this game. Don't worry about that.
Just wait for the Gragas top Lucian compositions, because both of those champions work right now.
Yep. Dashes everywhere. But
yeah, Lucian's actually not too bad. That's neither here nor there. Let's move on. Running out of time.
LMQ versus TSM. A couple things. The only thing really interesting to pull out of this game was really what TSM brought in after the fact. Other than the fact that LMQ won and they further distanced themselves into first place, TSM gave... actually, no, it wasn't in that game. It was in another game. Basically, LMQ beat TSM.
TSM prioritized Rengar over all the top junglers for some reason, and then failed to use it
The
at
shot
all.
calling. No, they did use it too much, and that was the problem. All of their
it didn't
major
work.
Well, right, that's the problem. Their shot
It's a
calling,
failure. They didn't win with it.
Their shot
Calm
calling
down,
was
Tom.
terrible. Their shot calling was terrible. The Amazing jumped in way too many times and just proceeded to die, or the rest of the team would die, and he would just limp away. And it just overall was a really shitty game for them, for TSM. And I say a shitty game, it's kind of what TSM does now, more or less, when they're working on their consistencies. And they went up against Complexity, and Glebe totally sucked ass. And Complexity probably could have won that game if they kept their shit together. But TSM led up some really interesting things just about what's going on internally. In their post-game interview, they had Wild Turtle and they had Bjergsen, and they were talking about a lot of the need for them to better their communication, to keep calmer during the game and continue to focus in on objectives and not make really stupid decisions like they have in the past. And then Wild Turtle led up some really interesting things just about how when the team's in game and they communicate, how that's been affecting them. And he specifically said, oh, well, I was getting shut down, and if I go ahead and I say, hey guys, I'm getting shut down here, I need help, or I'm losing my lane, well, that doesn't help the rest of the team. And to me, that's probably not 100% true. I should know if you're getting super shut down. But that just kind of tells me that as a team, there's probably a lot of infighting in the background, or there's a lot of what would be considered unsupportive communication. And that's clearly still a problem they have. They're going to stay middle of the ground. I mean, I don't think they're going to get relegated or anything like that, but I think their sights on Worlds is probably not going to happen.
As for Cloud9 versus Complexity, I think the two main things to focus on there, and that Cloud9 finally broke the Complexity curse, and they did it in convincing fashion. They were winning this game pretty much from start to finish. It looked like old Cloud9 from the last split. Everything was firing on all cylinders, and they just... I mean, it wasn't a complete one-sided stomp, but it was a very convincing victory.
It took a little too long for my liking. Like, obviously, Cloud9 was
that
in
had
control.
happened, Tom. That had happened. Yeah.
Well, let's put it this way. If we're thinking about things in terms of relegation and potential for Worlds, if Cloud9 can't close out a game against the 7th place team quicker than 45 minutes...
beats them all the time.
That's fine. Though. Why do they beat them all the time? That doesn't sound like a world-class caliber team to me.
No, Complexity's the world-class caliber team. That's what you need to understand.
Complexity is better than their standings would belie. A lot of their games that they lose are like really squeaker losses. Or they
a lot of the games
sometimes.
A lot of their games they lose is when Westerice is in mid lane and dies, and then Cortez decides that he's going to do the same exact thing and dies, and then all of a sudden they lose an inhibitor for it. They didn't lose an inhibitor today. They lost just towers for it today.
Or when Robert Exley backs in front of an almost dead tower and then loses the local gold because the tower dies when he's back at base.
I'm not 100% sold that the extra gold there is that crucial, but it's definitely worth it in an early game.
Second, it wasn't even like
it's the pot that would have saved his life, Tom. That's what you don't understand.
It's a huge misplay. Like, how can you they lost that game? First of all, can you not justify at least trying to take that extra gold? One auto attack, then you back.
His justification was that
one auto attack, then you back. Put that on a fucking poster. Put it on Robert Exley's wall. We're moving on.
One auto attack and then you stop denying XP, I think is the poster.
Yeah,
sure.
and one auto attack and your lane pushes onto their side and gets frozen.
Either way, they lost.
You gotta have faith that he had strategy there. I think that's a minor misplay.
Okay, I'll give you that. I didn't consider that point.
Granted, you should be able to recall a second later, get the gold, and deny the CS. But
yeah, he was pretty safe. I think he could have